Hello everyone, welcome to Sleep Space. Tonight we will talk about something that has fascinated humanity for generations: what people report when they come back from death. These are the stories of those who crossed a threshold that most of us fear. Stories from individuals whose hearts stopped, whose brains flatlined, whose bodies slipped out of this world for moments, minutes, sometimes even hours. And yet they returned. They returned with memories that are vivid, emotional, mysterious, and strangely consistent, no matter where on earth they lived or what they believed before it happened. These accounts give us a rare window into what may be waiting on the other side, or perhaps reveal something deeper about the way the human mind handles its final moments. Tonight, we explore what people see, hear, and feel during near-death experiences, and how these patterns might hint at a reality we don't yet understand. Settle into a comfortable place as we begin exploring these profound and sometimes unsettling testimonies. When someone's heart stops, it only takes a few seconds for the brain to run out of oxygen. In a medical sense, that person is clinically dead. Yet modern resuscitation techniques have made it possible for thousands of people to be brought back after this moment, sometimes long after. And what they describe when they awaken is rarely random. Instead, there are strange overlaps, repeating visions, sensations, and places they can't explain. These experiences form the foundation of what we're exploring tonight, the reported reality seen on the edge of life. One of the most common elements begins at the exact moment consciousness collapses. People say they don't feel the shutting down of the body the way you'd expect. There is rarely pain, rarely fear. Instead, it feels like they are being pulled backward very gently, as if their awareness is sliding out of the physical world. Many describe a soft sensation of detaching from the weight of their own body, like a coat falling from their shoulders. One person explained it as realizing, almost casually, "Oh, that body isn't mine anymore." Another described it as a quiet separation, as if an invisible zipper had opened and something essential had stepped out. This sensation of drifting or detaching is so universal that even researchers, who avoid romantic language, acknowledge the consistency. People from different cultures, ages, beliefs, and backgrounds use the same metaphors: floating, rising, removing, or stepping out. They say they feel weightless, unburdened, or suddenly free from a heaviness they didn't even know they were carrying. But right after this separation, something strange often happens. Individuals frequently describe being able to see the scene around their physical body. They hover above, beside, or sometimes even behind themselves, and they often recount incredibly specific details. Conversations between doctors, the sound of medical equipment, the exact clothing worn by paramedics. Some even describe seeing parts of the room that would have been physically impossible to observe from where their body lay. What makes these reports eerie is the accuracy. Nurses who witnessed these events later verified that many details were correct, down to the words spoken, the procedures used, and the people present. For a brain supposedly without oxygen, these perceptions are hard to explain. If consciousness depends entirely on normal brain function, how can accurate observations occur during the very moments when the brain is offline? But the story doesn't stop there. After this out-of-body perception, a second stage emerges, a transition that nearly everyone describes in some form. It begins with the feeling of moving through a space that isn't exactly physical. Some call it a tunnel, but many say that word isn't entirely accurate. It's more like a path, a corridor, or an unfolding passageway that forms around them. Some describe it as shifting light, others as a dim environment that becomes brighter the farther they travel. A few say it's not a place at all, but an experience of being pulled forward by something both gentle and irresistible. Even people who didn't believe in anything spiritual beforehand describe a sense of motion that feels more real than physical travel, more like being drawn toward a destination they somehow recognize, even though they've never been there. It's the familiarity that they struggle to explain, almost like remembering a dream that felt like home. And during this transition, a pattern begins to show itself. The sense of peace intensifies, anxiety dissolves. Many describe feeling surrounded by a warmth that isn't heat, but rather a presence, something comforting, intelligent, or aware. Some call it love. Others avoid that word entirely, but still agree that the feeling is unlike anything on Earth. It's peaceful in a way human language struggles to describe. Then comes one of the most famous elements of near-death experiences, the encounter with light. But the descriptions differ from the simplistic idea of a bright light at the end of a tunnel. People rarely say it's just brightness. Instead, they describe it as a presence that radiates not only illumination, but understanding, depth, and intention. Some say the light feels like it sees into them, as if it knows everything they've ever thought, done, or felt. Yet instead of judgment, they report overwhelming acceptance. The interesting part is that people of different religions do not all interpret the light the same way. They don't always call it God. Instead, they say it's something beyond any name, something that feels ancient, expansive, and aware. However, not every near-death experience is peaceful. A small percentage describe darker, more confusing states. These individuals report disorienting environments, fractured visions, or sensations of being trapped in a space that mirrors their inner turmoil. They might hear echoes, see shadowed landscapes, or feel like they're lost in a place without direction. These accounts are far less common, but they follow their own patterns too. The people who went through them often had intense fear initially, but many later reported being pulled out of the negative environment by something or someone, sometimes the same presence of light that others described, sometimes something entirely different. What's important to note is that even these frightening experiences often shift toward clarity or understanding before the person returns to life. People say they learned something, confronted something, or saw a part of themselves they had been ignoring, and when they wake up, they feel transformed, not traumatized as you might expect. Beyond the tunnel, the light, or the darkness, there is another common theme: encounters with loved ones who have passed away. These figures don't appear as vague hallucinations. Instead, people describe them with astonishing clarity, as if they were alive again, only healthier, younger, or more radiant. What's striking is that many individuals see relatives they didn't even know had died. Later, when they recover and tell the story, their living family confirms that the person they saw actually passed away without their knowledge. These encounters often involve communication, but not through spoken words. People say they exchange thoughts instantly without sound. They receive messages that feel like direct downloads into their awareness, reassurance, guidance, or a simple feeling of connection. The message is almost always the same: it's not your time, or you have to go back, and the way this message is delivered is rarely forceful. Instead, it carries a deep understanding. The individual senses that returning is necessary, even if they don't want to. And that's another fascinating detail. Almost no one wants to come back. Even people who had difficult lives, even those who were suffering, almost universally say the same thing. The place they experienced felt more real, more meaningful, more alive than anything on Earth. The decision to return rarely feels like their own. It's something that happens to them, often suddenly. One moment they're surrounded by light, or walking with a relative, or floating in a place that feels like the essence of peace. And in the next moment they are slammed back into their body, gasping for air, blinking against harsh lighting, feeling heavy and constrained again. The contrast is so extreme that many people cry when they wake up, not from pain, but from a profound sense of loss. They describe the physical world as feeling dense, muted, or distant, as if everything around them is suddenly less real than where they just were. Doctors see this reaction all the time. They expect relief or gratitude from patients who are revived, but instead they find confusion, sadness, or silence. And once the patient gathers their words, that's when the stories emerge. Stories so similar, so detailed, and so emotionally charged that it becomes difficult to dismiss them as dreams or hallucinations. But perhaps the most intriguing part of these experiences isn't the light, the tunnel, the out-of-body moments, or even the encounters with loved ones. It's what happens after the person returns to life. Their personality shifts, their values transform, their priorities become clearer. They lose their fear of death, and they often gain a sense of purpose that wasn't there before. Many describe a renewed desire to help others, to be kinder, or to pursue something meaningful. It's as if crossing the threshold, even briefly, reshapes something fundamental within them. Some also report strange abilities, heightened intuition, increased sensitivity to other people's emotions, vivid dreams, or an altered sense of time. They say they can feel the intentions of others more clearly or sense changes in their environment. Science hasn't found an explanation for these changes, but they appear across cases from all around the world. All of this raises a question that has puzzled researchers for decades. Are these experiences simply the brain's final illusions, or are they glimpses into something beyond physical existence? Some scientists argue that near-death experiences are the result of a dying brain creating comforting narratives, but others point to the accuracy of the observations made during periods when the brain should have been inactive. Observations that should have been impossible if consciousness were truly offline. As we continue deeper into this exploration, we'll unravel the patterns that repeat across thousands of these accounts, the visions that humans keep seeing no matter who they are, and the mysteries that science hasn't yet explained. Across continents, languages, belief systems, and generations, people who return from the edge describe experiences so similar that it defies ordinary explanation. When thousands of individuals, separated by culture, religion, history, and distance, all report remarkably consistent patterns, something deeper is happening. Whether these patterns reflect a universal psychological process or something truly beyond the physical realm is still debated, but the repetition itself is undeniable. One of the most striking patterns is the sudden shift in perspective that occurs the moment someone begins dying. It is as though their awareness stops being anchored inside the body and instead expands outward, giving them a vantage point they've never had before. People often describe feeling like they are no longer inside themselves. They perceive the environment around them with a clarity that goes beyond ordinary senses. They say they can see in all directions at once without turning their head. They can see above, below, and behind simultaneously, as if sight is no longer tied to physical eyes but to pure awareness. And this expanded perspective is not chaotic or overwhelming. Instead, it feels natural, as though it's the way consciousness is meant to work when it is no longer confined by biology. Many say this shift feels like remembering something they had forgotten, something fundamental about what they truly are when the body is no longer restricting them. Another repeated theme is the disappearance of time. People say that everything unfolds at once. Past and present seem to merge. They experience events not as a sequence, but as a whole, a complete picture. Some describe it beautifully. They say time becomes flexible, like it bends around them instead of moving through them. Others say it stops entirely. They know things instantly, understand things fully, and move through experiences without any sense of seconds or minutes ticking by. This collapse of time plays a major role in what comes next, the life review. People often speak of reliving every moment they've ever experienced, but not in the way memory normally works. It isn't fragmented or fuzzy, it's total. They feel every emotion they ever caused, in themselves and in others. They see their actions from multiple perspectives, including the feelings of the people they affected. One person described it as becoming both myself and everyone I ever touched. These life reviews vary widely in detail, but the emotional pattern is consistent. They aren't shown what they accomplished, what awards they earned, or how successful they were. Instead, they are shown the impact they had on other people. Small moments suddenly become enormous. A brief act of kindness, something they forgot entirely, becomes deeply meaningful. And moments of cruelty, impatience, or indifference weigh heavily as they feel the emotional consequences of those actions mirrored back at them. What's fascinating is that there is no sense of punishment during this review. People do not report judgment from an outside force. Instead, they feel a profound understanding, an internal recognition of where they grew, where they failed, and where they could have been better. Many describe it as learning, not being condemned. And almost everyone says the most important parts of the review were the moments where they made someone feel loved or safe. Those moments shine the brightest. This repeated focus on compassion is eerie because it appears even in people who were not spiritual, not religious, or who never believed in anything beyond the physical world. They come back changed, convinced that kindness matters far more than they ever imagined. Not because someone told them to be good, but because they experienced, viscerally, how every interaction ripples outward. Following the life review, many people describe entering a place that is not quite Earth-like and not quite abstract. Some call it a landscape, but others say it's more like a realm of pure meaning. Despite the differences in description, the emotional pattern is consistent. They feel at home. It's a place they recognize, even if they have never seen anything like it in life. They say the environment feels alive, not with plants or animals, but with a kind of consciousness. Some describe it as a field of intelligence, where everything communicates without words. People try to use earthly metaphors, light, colors, space, shapes, but always emphasize that none of these descriptions fully capture the environment. They say colors exist that don't exist here, sounds that aren't made of vibration, light that seems to carry emotion or intention. It is a place where structure and meaning blend together seamlessly. One detail that recurs across cultures is the presence of beings or entities, not always human, sometimes not even shaped like anything we would recognize. These beings radiate intelligence and calm. They often act as guides, though the communication happens without speech. People say they download information instantly. An entire concept, an entire understanding of something, enters their awareness in a single moment. These beings are not described as angels or ancestors unless the person chooses those words. Instead, the descriptions suggest something more universal, consciousness without form. These encounters feel familiar. People say they feel like they know these beings, or that these beings know them intimately. And what's even stranger is that the beings seem amused by the person's return to life, as if they understand something the living do not. Not mockingly, but with a kind of gentle compassion, as though they are watching someone wake up from a dream and re-enter it again. A recurring message appears in these encounters, that life is a temporary experience, a learning process, and that the person has not completed what they came to do. The message is rarely about specific tasks or missions. It's more emotional, more foundational. People say they are told, or made to understand, that they still have relationships to mend, lessons to learn, or connections to form. They still have things to give, or experience, or understand. The decision to return is not forced on them, but it is presented as something necessary, as if their story is incomplete. Then there are the reports of knowledge, moments where people say they understood the structure of reality in a way they cannot articulate once they come back. They claim to have seen how consciousness works, why life exists, or how everything is connected. They say the answers were obvious there, clear as daylight, but impossible to put into words afterward. Some describe it as remembering something forgotten. Others say it felt like they were shown the entire tapestry of existence for just a moment. Many of these individuals feel frustrated when they return because the knowledge fades like a dream. They are left with only a trace, a sensation of understanding without the details. Yet even this faint residue changes how they see the world. They feel more connected to others, less afraid of challenges, and more aware of something larger behind everyday life. And there is another common element, the boundary. People frequently describe reaching a point, sometimes a line, sometimes a door, sometimes a field or river, that marks the farthest they can go before they cannot return. The form of the boundary varies, but the meaning is always the same. Crossing it means staying permanently. People say they can feel it deeply, instinctively. They sense that if they move beyond that point, their connection to their physical body will break completely. The boundary is usually where the message comes. You have to go back. Some individuals beg not to return. They say the place they experienced feels more real than life. So real that it makes physical existence seem muted, like a faded echo. They describe it as losing everything warm and meaningful when they are pulled back. But despite the resistance, they return instantly. There is no transition back. It's abrupt, like an immediate fall into a body that feels heavy and strange. Almost everyone who crosses this threshold and comes back reports profound sadness in the first moments after revival. They often cry. Others lie silently, staring at the ceiling, overwhelmed by the contrast. Some refuse to talk about what they saw until days or weeks later. Doctors and nurses report these reactions with a mix of confusion and curiosity. They're used to saving lives, but not to patients reacting as though they have lost something infinitely valuable. And while the emotional reactions vary, the aftermath shows remarkable consistency. People who have near-death experiences often make dramatic changes to their lives. They walk away from careers, leave unhealthy relationships, or dedicate themselves to helping others. They become less materialistic, less judgmental, less concerned with status or achievement. They say those things feel meaningless compared to what they experienced. There are also reports of increased intuition. People say they can sense when others are hurting, even if nothing is said. They feel strange bursts of insight or experience unexplainable coincidences. Some describe an ability to feel the emotions of others as if those emotions were their own. Others say they can anticipate conversations or events moments before they happen, not in a supernatural dramatic way, but in subtle, consistent impressions that they didn't have before. Whether this hints at some deeper connection between consciousnesses or is simply a psychological shift remains a mystery. But the pattern repeats enough that researchers have documented it in multiple studies. People come back different, not slightly different, radically different. What makes all of this even more intriguing is that near-death experiences often align across people who had no idea such patterns existed. Children describe them with the same details as adults. People from remote villages describe the same tunnel, the same light, the same sense of leaving the body. Atheists describe the same feeling of being known, loved, and sent back. Individuals who had no exposure to near-death accounts tell stories that match the patterns perfectly. The consistency across time and culture raises a question. If these experiences are just hallucinations created by a dying brain, why are they so structured, so coherent, and so eerily similar? Why do they produce lasting psychological change? Why do the memories remain vivid for decades, often clearer than normal life events? And why do they continue to appear even in people who medically should not have been capable of conscious experience during the period they describe? Even in the most conservative scientific interpretations, the patterns are difficult to dismiss. There is something happening during those moments, something that pushes the limits of what we understand about consciousness. These repeated visions hint at an underlying structure, a shared pattern, a common landscape that countless people have traveled. Whether this landscape is symbolic, biological, or actual is the heart of the mystery. As we move deeper into the stories of those who returned from the threshold of death, the most difficult elements to explain aren't the peaceful sensations or the emotional transformations. Those can be attributed, at least in theory, to psychological processes or neurological responses. What truly challenges our understanding are the visions and insights that appear impossible, details people couldn't have known, scenes they couldn't have seen, and information they couldn't have accessed in any conventional way. Some of the most striking examples occur during the earliest stage of death, when the brain should not be capable of forming coherent perceptions at all. A person might be unconscious, their heart not beating, their brain deprived of oxygen, yet when they come back, they describe conversations that occurred while they were clinically dead. They recall the exact number of people in the room, the tools the medical team used, the color of gloves, the brand names on equipment, or even objects that were behind closed doors or on top of cabinets. One of the most frequently reported visions is remarkably consistent: the ability to observe the scene of one's own death from a vantage point outside the body. People describe floating above themselves, looking down with complete clarity. They see the way their chest rises and falls, or doesn't rise at all. They see medical staff rushing in. They see paramedics kneeling beside them. They hear instructions shouted across rooms or hallways. These observations tend to be extraordinarily accurate. In many cases, they are later verified by the very people involved in the resuscitation. This phenomenon is known as veridical perception, and it is one of the most thoroughly documented but least understood aspects of near-death experiences. It challenges the idea that consciousness is strictly tied to the physical brain, because these perceptions occur at a time when the brain should not have the ability to form memories or process sensory information. And these aren't vague impressions, they are precise details. As one doctor described, patients tell us things they couldn't possibly have seen, and every detail checks out. Some patients even describe seeing their own bodies from angles they physically could not have been positioned to view. Others recount events that occurred in entirely different rooms, or visions of relatives arriving at the hospital before anyone told them they were there. There are individuals who claim they saw things happening miles away, events that were later confirmed by witnesses. People describe seeing loved ones at home, unaware of the medical emergency unfolding elsewhere. They describe a sibling crying in another city, or a parent pacing anxiously in a hallway they themselves had never physically entered. While skeptics argue that these are coincidences or reconstructed memories, the consistency and accuracy make them difficult to dismiss. Something appears to be observing, perceiving, and remembering during a time when perception should not be possible. Another category of unexplained visions involves information the person had no way of knowing beforehand. Someone might see a deceased relative they never met in life. When they awaken, they describe the person precisely, down to facial features, clothing, or mannerisms. Their family confirms the accuracy. There are cases where individuals meet siblings who died before they were born, cousins they never knew existed, or ancestors they had never seen pictures of. And yet their descriptions match historical records or family photographs they were not aware of. A particularly eerie subset of these experiences involves children. A child too young to understand death, sometimes as young as 3 or 4, will describe seeing a grandparent who passed away before the child was born. They will use the exact nickname that grandparent was known by. They will repeat phrases the grandparent used to say, or they will describe the clothes the grandparent was buried in, something they could not have seen or heard about. These accounts stretch the boundaries of what we consider possible. If consciousness is produced solely by the brain, how does a non-functioning brain access information it never stored? And if these experiences are hallucinations, why are they so detailed, so consistent, and so accurate across thousands of people? The most astonishing visions occur in what many survivors call the realm beyond, the place they enter after the initial detachment from the body. The descriptions vary, but patterns emerge again. Landscapes that feel both physical and symbolic, environments filled with light that seems alive, and structures that appear to be made of energy rather than matter. People describe places that feel familiar yet entirely foreign, a sensation of remembering something they never learned. Some individuals say they saw cities filled with radiant architecture, buildings that shimmered like light but felt solid to the touch. Others describe landscapes that seemed to be made from thought itself, where the environment responded to their emotions or intentions. One person said, "The place didn't exist until I looked at it. and then it unfolded like it had been waiting for me. Many describe encountering figures that weren't human but were undeniably intelligent. These beings don't communicate with words but through direct transmission of meaning. People say they received answers to questions they didn't even know they had. They were shown truths they felt they understood completely, but only while they were there. Once they returned to their physical bodies, the clarity dissolved, like waking from a dream that carried a message you no longer remember. One recurring vision involves what survivors call the structure. They describe seeing something that looks like an interconnected network, a grid or web of light stretching endlessly in all directions. Some interpret it as the fabric of reality. Others say it represents the connections between all consciousness. A few describe it as a kind of blueprint, a pattern that links every living being to every other. And most say the structure radiated an intelligence, as though it was alive. Even people who were rigid skeptics about anything spiritual before their experience describe this structure. They struggle to explain it, but emphasize its significance. They say it was the most important thing they saw, something that made everything else make sense. When asked what it was, they usually say the same thing. I knew then, but I can't explain it now. Another strange pattern involves hearing sound, not as we normally hear it, but as a vibration that carries meaning. Some say they heard music so beautiful that human instruments cannot replicate it. Others describe sounds that change the environment around them, like notes that shaped light into form. A few report hearing a single tone or frequency that felt like the foundation of existence, something so deep and resonant that it seemed to vibrate through their entire being. Then there are the visions that seem symbolic, yet feel undeniably real to the person experiencing them. Someone might see a river they must cross, a gate they must pass through, or a field they must walk across. Another might see a book or scroll containing what feels like the story of their life. Others describe seeing geometric shapes that expand and contract like breathing organisms, radiating knowledge that cannot be put into words. These visions appear different on the surface, but the underlying feeling is always the same. The person has reached a threshold. Something inside them recognizes that going further would mean not returning. They say they could feel the boundary, not with their senses, but with their being. It is described as a point of no return, a place where the physical world fades completely. Individuals who cross up to this boundary often describe an overwhelming sense of truth, like understanding their purpose, their existence, and the nature of life all at once. But when they wake up in their physical bodies again, much of that knowledge evaporates. What remains is a lingering feeling that life has depth and meaning far beyond what we normally perceive. The final category of unexplained visions is perhaps the most puzzling: premonitions. Some people return from near-death experiences claiming they saw future events. They may describe these events as images or as knowledge they suddenly possessed. Most of these individuals never speak about the specifics publicly. But privately, many say they sensed something important about the trajectory of their own lives, or about relationships they needed to repair, or about difficult choices they would face. A few describe seeing glimpses of large events, changes in their communities, in the world, or in their own families. Whether these visions come true in a literal sense varies, but the emotional certainty behind them is unmistakable. The experience gives people an intuition that seems to guide them in ways they can't logically explain. Even those who do not receive specific premonitions often return with a sense of knowing that their life has direction. They don't know the details, but they feel a kind of trust in the unfolding of events. They say they sense that life is not random, that there is an underlying coherence that shapes everything. All of these visions, accurate perceptions during unconsciousness, encounters with unknown relatives, detailed landscapes, beings of light, premonitions, and glimpses of a structure behind reality, push against the limits of neuroscience and psychology. They force us to question the nature of consciousness, memory, and existence itself. If these experiences were isolated or inconsistent, they could be dismissed. but they repeat over and over, described by people of all backgrounds, ages, and beliefs, and the consistency is what makes them so difficult to explain. Something is happening in those moments near death, something that challenges our understanding of the mind and suggests that consciousness may not be confined to the boundaries of the physical body. Whether these visions reflect another realm, another dimension, or another layer of reality is still unknown, but the accounts continue to grow, each one adding a new piece to a mystery that has followed humanity since the beginning of time. While near-death experiences often focus on the journey outward, the detachment, the encounters, the visions, the moment of return is its own strange phenomenon. The transition back to life is not gentle. It's abrupt, shocking, and sometimes traumatic, not because of pain, but because of the sudden contrast between two vastly different states of existence. People often say the return feels like being squeezed into something too small, like trying to fit a vast awareness back into a narrow container. This sensation alone reveals a great deal about how they perceive the difference between physical and non-physical states. One of the most consistent descriptions of the return is the feeling of falling. People say they are pulled backward, downward, or inward. The movement is instantaneous. One moment they are in a realm of light, connection, and expanded consciousness, and the next they slam into a body that feels heavy and unfamiliar. The awareness they had moments before is compressed, narrowed, and slowed. They say it's like going from a limitless sky to a small room with the lights dimmed. Some describe the moment of re-entry as painful, not in the physical sense, but in an existential one. They feel the weight of gravity. They feel the limitations of the body. They feel the return of emotions like fear, worry, and confusion. And they feel time again, ticking in a linear way instead of surrounding them as a complete whole. Many survivors say the physical world feels less real for the first several minutes or hours after waking. Colors look muted, sounds seem dull. The environment feels flat, as if something essential is missing. They often feel disoriented, not because of medication or trauma, but because they can still remember the clarity, the expansion, and the profound sense of connection they experienced on the other side. Medical professionals frequently notice these reactions before patients ever speak about their experiences. Nurses describe patients waking up crying silently, not from pain, but from a strange emotional shock. Others wake up wide-eyed, looking around the room with an expression that is both awe and grief. Doctors sometimes assume the patient is confused or frightened, but those who later share their stories say those first moments were filled with an overwhelming sense of loss. They had been somewhere that felt like home, somewhere that made more sense than life itself, and being pulled out of it felt like returning from a deep dream that was more real than waking. Once the patient stabilizes, the after effects begin to emerge, changes that ripple through their personality, their beliefs, and their behavior. These after effects are so consistent across thousands of cases that researchers have formally documented them. People who return from near-death experiences often share an identical emotional shift. They lose their fear of death. This change is profound. It's not casual or philosophical. They say the fear simply disappears, like a door that was locked suddenly swings open. They no longer see death as an end, but as a transition, a return to something familiar and peaceful. They often describe their fear of suffering, but not of dying itself. This lack of fear isn't reckless. If anything, it makes them more thoughtful about how they live. But the psychological shift is unmistakable. Alongside this change comes a dramatic shift in values. People lose interest in material pursuits, status, competition, and shallow concerns. They become more compassionate, more patient, and more appreciative of simple moments. They say relationships matter far more than achievements. Small acts of kindness become the foundation of how they measure meaning. Many survivors walk away from environments that are toxic or superficial. They seek connection, purpose, and authenticity. Another consistent after effect is an increase in empathy. People report feeling emotions more deeply, not just their own, but the emotions of others. They say they can sense the moods, intentions, or struggles of people around them with surprising clarity. This heightened sensitivity can be overwhelming at first. Some survivors describe it as emotional electricity, a constant awareness of the atmosphere around them. Over time, many learn to manage it, and it becomes a strength that guides their interactions and decisions. These emotional changes are often accompanied by cognitive and perceptual shifts that are more mysterious. Survivors say their intuition becomes stronger. They experience sudden insights or flashes of understanding that have no logical source. They might sense when a friend is in trouble or when a major life change is coming. They describe this intuition not as guessing, but as a quiet certainty that arises from somewhere deeper. Some individuals report precognitive dreams, vivid visions that later come to pass in subtle or literal ways. Others say they begin noticing synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that happen so frequently they feel guided. Whether these phenomena are psychological effects or something more is debated, but the consistency across cases is striking. Another after effect often reported is hypersensitivity to the environment. Some individuals become sensitive to light, sound, or even electronic devices. They say bright lights feel overwhelming, loud sounds feel intrusive, and technology sometimes behaves strangely around them. Devices flicker, alarms malfunction, or electronics freeze unexpectedly when they are near. While this could be coincidence, the pattern repeats so often that it appears in multiple independent studies. There are survivors who claim they developed unusual abilities they did not have before: heightened creativity, sudden musical talent, or the ability to solve complex problems effortlessly. Others describe a newfound drive to learn, create, or pursue spiritual or scientific questions. It's as if the experience awakened a part of the mind that had been dormant, or shifted something in the way their brain processes information. Perhaps the most dramatic after effect is the loss of interest in living a life that does not feel authentic. Many survivors quit jobs that once defined them. They leave long-term careers, even successful ones, because they suddenly feel empty or misaligned. They pursue work that involves helping others, becoming nurses, counselors, teachers, or volunteers. They want to ease suffering, guide others, or share what they learned. The need for meaning becomes stronger than any desire for wealth or recognition. Family members often notice these changes first. They say the person seems calmer, more gentle, more compassionate, but they also say the person is more assertive about avoiding negativity or superficiality. Near-death survivors frequently talk about boundaries, the ones they didn't have before. They no longer tolerate cruelty, manipulation, or dishonesty. It's not anger that drives them, but clarity. One of the strangest aftermaths reported is the lingering memory of the place they visited. The memory doesn't fade like ordinary memories. It remains vivid for decades. Survivors say it stays sharp, as if it is imprinted somewhere deeper than regular experience. They remember the light, the presence, the colors, the beings, the emotions, and the knowledge, even if the details become harder to verbalize. They don't recall it as a dream. They recall it as something more real than waking life. This lingering memory often brings with it a sense of longing. People say they miss the peace, the connection, the warmth. They don't necessarily want to die. They just miss the feeling of being in that state. It becomes a quiet ache, something they carry inside them. And yet this longing doesn't interfere with their ability to live. Instead, it seems to make them more patient, more understanding, more willing to endure challenges because they believe there is meaning behind them. Another widely reported after effect is the sense of being watched over or guided. Survivors say they feel the presence of the beings they encountered, or the presence of loved ones who have passed. These sensations are not frightening. They feel like gentle nudges, moments of encouragement, or subtle guidance in difficult times. Survivors say they feel less alone, not because they are imagining companionship, but because they feel connected to something larger, something that continues to accompany them. And then there is the social after effect, one of the most challenging parts for survivors. Many hesitate to share their experience, afraid of being dismissed, mocked, or misunderstood. When they finally do speak about it, their lives often change dramatically. Some find community among others who have had similar experiences. Others face skepticism, especially from individuals who insist the experience was a hallucination, a dream, or the brain shutting down. Yet even in the face of skepticism, survivors remain unwavering about what they saw and felt. They say the experience was more vivid, more profound, and more coherent than anything they had ever experienced while alive. They insist that whatever they saw was not the product of a malfunctioning brain, but a glimpse of a deeper reality. The final after effect is perhaps the most powerful, the sense that life has a purpose. Survivors say they no longer feel lost or directionless. They believe they came back for a reason. They might not know exactly what that reason is, but they trust that it will unfold. This belief is not tied to religion or philosophy. It arises from a direct experience of something beyond life. It becomes their anchor. All of these after effects, emotional transformation, enhanced intuition, altered values, heightened empathy, perceptual changes, and a sense of purpose, form a pattern so strong that researchers consider it a hallmark of near-death experiences. These aren't small changes. They reshape the entire trajectory of a person's life. We will now drift into a territory that is harder to categorize, because it isn't about tunnel visions or loved ones or even life reviews. Instead, it centers on the strange patterns that emerge around time, choice, and the sense that the dying brain, or whatever awareness exists at the edge of death, steps outside of the ordinary flow of reality. People describe this in different ways, but the similarities are difficult to ignore. Some say it felt like all possible outcomes of their life were visible at once. Others say they felt suspended in a reality where time no longer moved forward or backward. A few claim they saw moments that hadn't happened yet, future scenes that later came true. And some describe an overwhelming sense that they were being shown the deeper structure behind their existence, as if the familiar world had been peeled back just enough to reveal faint, luminous machinery humming behind it. These experiences are often dismissed as hallucinations born from stress or dying neurons firing chaotically. But what makes them intriguing is that they rarely feel chaotic to the people who live through them. Instead, they feel ordered. They feel deliberate. Many who return say they had the sense of stepping into a different kind of knowing, a perspective that was impossibly calm and impossibly wide, as though they had moved beyond the mind's normal limitations. In this suspended world, they claim things made sense that had never made sense before. Questions that once felt unanswerable suddenly felt laughably simple. Like puzzles, only adults pretend are difficult, even though a child could see the solution. One striking pattern is the sensation of entering a place where time is not a line, but a landscape. People describe hovering above their life in a way that doesn't only show the past, but also all the forks they never took. They describe potential futures branching out from illogical angles, but somehow they instinctively understand how each path relates to the others. They explain it like seeing maps drawn on top of maps, layers of meaning that overlap until everything becomes one coherent, shimmering structure. They often report understanding why certain moments had to happen to allow other moments to exist. It wasn't fate, they say, but something closer to balance or design, or a kind of internal logic the living rarely recognize. There are people who describe seeing themselves in situations they had never lived through, conversations they had not yet had, or tragedies and triumphs that hadn't occurred. And after being revived, some swear these visions unfolded exactly as they saw them. Sometimes days, sometimes years later. Scientists caution that memory is fragile, that the mind naturally tries to connect dots that were never truly connected. But those who lived the experience insist it wasn't a guess, or déjà vu, or a coincidental resemblance. They say the moment they returned, they knew the memory was real, because it had felt real in a way life itself rarely does. Another pattern involves the feeling of standing in the presence of a choice. Unlike the decision to come back, which we explored earlier, this kind of choice is different. People describe encountering crossroads that represent entire directions their life could take if they returned. Most say they didn't see every detail, but they felt the emotional consequence of each path. Some roads felt heavy, others light. Some felt deeply fulfilling, while others felt like an echo of the life they were living before. What's remarkable is that when these people come back, they often make drastic changes. They leave careers that had drained them for years. They move to new cities. They end toxic relationships with sudden clarity. They say they didn't decide these things in the normal human sense of decision-making. They simply remembered which path they had chosen in that other reality. A few describe something even stranger, the feeling that they stepped outside of a single timeline entirely and entered a kind of vast, silent space filled with the sense of infinite possibility. Some explain it as seeing versions of themselves, different ages, different lives, different outcomes, all existing at the same time. They don't see this in a visual sense, but rather an intuitive one, as if they suddenly had access to an expanded understanding of what a person actually is. They say they realized they were not a single story unfolding from birth to death, but a collection of countless potentials, all part of something larger. Some interpret this spiritually, others describe it in more philosophical or metaphysical terms, and a few say they were simply overwhelmed by the beauty of it, unable to translate what they saw into human language. There are also reports of people experiencing what feels like a gentle unraveling of identity, not in a frightening way, but in a peaceful, natural way, like loosening a knot that had been tied too tightly for too long. They describe drifting away from the I they had always believed themselves to be, and instead slipping into a broader awareness that felt ancient, familiar, and indescribably comforting. They say it felt like stepping out of a costume they forgot they were wearing. Some even say the sense of individuality vanished altogether, replaced by a feeling of merging with something infinitely larger. They didn't lose themselves, they say, they expanded. Interestingly, a few people claim that during this expanded awareness, they could access memories they had never consciously experienced. Not visions, not imagination, but memories, with emotional context, sensory detail, and a deep sense of truth. Some describe remembering events from early childhood they hadn't thought about for decades. Others describe recalling moments from before they were born, though they struggle to explain how that could even be possible. A small number insist they remembered something like the process of choosing their life, as though they were reviewing why they entered the world in the first place. Whether literal or symbolic, these reports carry a strange consistency, a sense that the self existed before the body and will continue after it. Many survivors talk about a moment where they felt as though they were shown the underlying pattern of existence itself. They describe it as a web of luminous connections or a field of meaning that binds everything together. Some see it as light, some see it as geometry, others say they didn't see anything at all, but they felt the structure the way you can feel the shape of something in a dark room without needing to look at it. They say the pattern wasn't random, and that every life, every interaction, every moment, no matter how small, contributed to this greater whole. People often return from this experience with a calmness that borders on eerie. They say they no longer fear the unknown because they've felt the presence of something intelligent within it. Another unusual pattern involves sound. A surprising number of people describe hearing a hum, or a vibration, or a tone that felt alive. Not like a noise from the outside world, but more like the frequency of reality itself. They say it felt warm, welcoming, and somehow familiar. In some cases, they claim the sound seemed to communicate, not through words, but through resonance. It's as if the sound contained meaning, and that meaning didn't require language to be understood. People often say this was one of the most comforting parts of the experience, like being wrapped in a blanket made of pure understanding. Some survivors describe being shown how interconnected everything is, not in a metaphorical sense, but in a literal one. They say they could feel how their choices affected others, not just emotionally, but fundamentally, like plucking a string and feeling the entire web vibrate. They say they understood how one small act of kindness, or cruelty, or neglect rippled far beyond what they ever knew. Many return, determined to change how they move through the world. Some become more patient. Some become more empathetic. Some stop living on autopilot because they say they have seen in a direct, undeniable way how every moment matters. There are also people who report witnessing events on Earth while their body was clinically dead. Some describe floating above operating tables. Others describe visiting family members, hearing conversations across the hospital, or seeing things they couldn't possibly have seen. These are the cases that draw the most scientific curiosity, because occasionally the details they report are verified by doctors, nurses, or family members later. The brain shouldn't be capable of forming new memories while deprived of oxygen, yet these memories exist. They shouldn't be able to witness distant events, yet in rare cases the descriptions match reality. These cases don't prove anything definitive, but they raise important questions. What is consciousness, and does it truly depend on the brain? Even more mysterious are the people who insist they observed not just the physical world, but something beyond it, something that felt like the scaffolding behind reality. They describe layers upon layers, like sliding panels in a puzzle box, revealing increasingly complex structures. Some say they felt like they were being guided through these layers, not by a person or an entity, but by the experience itself, as though it had a built-in intelligence. They describe the sensation of gradually approaching a boundary, a threshold beyond which there was no returning, and right at that boundary, many say they felt a profound sense of peace, so deep and so complete that it made ordinary happiness feel like a dim shadow. What's fascinating is that these experiences don't always make people more certain about what lies beyond death. In fact, many survivors say they came back with fewer answers than they expected, but with a deeper sense of wonder. They say the experience wasn't about providing conclusions, it was about expanding the questions. It made the universe feel larger, more mysterious, and more interconnected than they had ever imagined. And although they struggle to describe the experience in human language, they often say the same thing, that what they saw or felt was more real than reality. These patterns don't fit neatly into scientific explanations, but they don't fully align with religious teachings either. They hover in a strange, in-between space, too consistent to ignore, yet too elusive to classify. And maybe that's the point. Maybe whatever people experience at the very edge of life is not meant to be reduced to a single interpretation. Maybe it isn't supposed to fit into a category at all. Maybe these glimpses occur precisely because our normal understanding of reality is too narrow to contain the full picture. What makes these accounts so compelling is not just the details themselves, but the profound transformations they spark. People who return from these experiences often say they no longer fear death, not because they know exactly what comes next, but because they sense something beyond the edges of human perception, something vast, calm, intelligent, and deeply familiar. They don't claim certainty, they claim perspective, and from that perspective, life feels more precious, more connected, and more meaningful than before. Why do so many people, from different ages and backgrounds, describe patterns that overlap so clearly? These are not isolated reports. They come from children too young to know symbolism, from adults who never believed in anything spiritual, from doctors who tried to rationalize their own brush with death, from people of every culture and worldview. And still, the threads repeat: visions of light, reunions with loved ones, life reviews, perspectives outside the body, encounters with entities or presences, glimpses of possible futures. and the overwhelming sense of peace that seems to wrap around everything like a soft, unbreakable fabric. As people recount these experiences, they often say they do not feel like dreams. Dreams are fragmented. They shift abruptly. They follow impossible logic. They evaporate upon waking. But near-death experiences feel the opposite: coherent, structured, undeniably meaningful. People say they remember them with the clarity of a vivid life event. Not a hallucination. They don't fade. They don't blur. They stay sharp, even decades later, like a permanent mark etched into consciousness. Some scientists argue that these memories only feel real because the brain, under extreme stress, creates powerful sensations. They reference lack of oxygen, chemical release, and the possibility that long-stored memories spill into awareness in chaotic bursts. But even scientists who uphold this explanation acknowledge that it doesn't fully account for the out-of-body observations, the verified details, the shared patterns among people who have nothing in common, or the transformational impact these experiences leave behind. The theories answer pieces of the puzzle, but not the entire picture. Many survivors describe a strange clarity when they return, not just about life, but about reality itself. They say that everyday existence feels like it has layers they never recognized before. They notice coincidences more sharply. They feel connected to people in ways they cannot explain. Some say they can sense emotions in others with uncanny accuracy. Others say time itself feels different, as though they stepped outside of it and came back with a new awareness of how moments flow and fold into each other. There are also those who develop unusual experiences after returning, such as vivid intuition, recurring visions, or dreams that later align with real events. These claims are impossible to measure scientifically, yet they arise frequently in near-death survivor communities. People insist they did not seek these abilities or believe in them beforehand. They simply emerged, uninvited, as if something inside them had been rewired. And then there are the rare individuals who describe feeling torn upon returning. They say the world feels heavier, more confined, as though they had temporarily experienced a state of awareness that made physical existence seem small by comparison. They often speak of grief, not grief over dying, but grief over leaving behind the immense peace they felt on the other side. Some struggle with this feeling for years before learning to integrate it into their lives. Others embrace it as a reminder that there is more to existence than the limited view we carry day to day. What's striking is that regardless of culture, belief system, or personal history, a vast number of people report encountering something that feels profoundly intelligent during their near-death experience. Some interpret this intelligence as God, others as a presence, an energy, or even their own expanded consciousness. They say it isn't like speaking to a person. It's more like communicating with a truth, a force, or a knowing that doesn't need language. They describe it as warm, patient, and utterly without judgment. It doesn't command, it doesn't threaten, it simply understands. Many say this presence made them feel completely seen, not just as who they were in life, but as who they were beneath the layers of fear, regret, and confusion that accumulate through the years. It's often described as the first time they truly felt understood. People return from this encounter with a different perspective on their own flaws. They become less self-critical, less trapped in their old patterns. The present seems to strip away the unnecessary weight they carried, leaving them with a clearer sense of purpose. Some report that this intelligence did not tell them what to do, but instead revealed possibilities. It showed them paths that could unfold if they returned to life, not as a mandate, but as potential. They say it felt like someone gently opening their hand to reveal choices they hadn't noticed before. This suggests that near-death experiences may not be about giving answers, but about widening the lens through which people see their existence. There are also the accounts of people who describe seeing landscapes or environments that feel impossible, places that do not resemble Earth yet feel deeply familiar. Some see meadows or forests that glow with a soft, otherworldly light. Others see expansive spaces that seem to stretch endlessly, filled with warm colours and fluid shapes that move like thoughts. A few describe structures, vast, intricate designs that feel more like ideas than physical buildings. These spaces don't operate by the rules of physics or geography. Survivors say they felt like the places were responding to them, shifting in a way that matched their emotional or mental state. Interestingly, many people describe these environments as startlingly stable. Not chaotic, not dreamlike, but consistent. They move through them with a sense of intention. They feel grounded in them. This sense of stability is one of the most mysterious aspects of these experiences because it contradicts what we know about the disordered, fragmented nature of hallucinations. It suggests that whatever people are experiencing has structure that feels purposeful. Another striking pattern is the overwhelming sense of welcome that people describe. Even those who were terrified of death beforehand often say their fear dissolved instantly the moment the experience began. They say they felt safe in a way they had never felt before, enveloped by a warmth that seemed to come from outside and inside simultaneously. Some call it love, but not the emotional kind we experience on Earth. They describe it as more pure, more complete, more absolute, something beyond emotion, beyond thought. It creates a paradox. People who return often say they are grateful for the experience, but also quietly burdened by the knowledge that nothing in life can replicate the peace they felt. They say it changes them in ways that make daily stresses feel minor. Arguments, anxieties, unfinished goals, these things lose their power. Many survivors start living more simply, appreciating moments with a depth they never understood before. They stop chasing things that once seemed important because they have touched something that makes the noise of life feel small by comparison. Some individuals describe a lingering sense that the boundary between life and whatever they experienced has become thinner. Not in a frightening way, but in an intriguing one. They say they occasionally sense that presence again, subtle, quiet, like a memory brushing against the edge of consciousness. It doesn't interfere with their life. It simply reminds them that the world is wider and more mysterious than they once believed. And yet, for all these extraordinary reports, near-death experiences do not resolve the great mysteries of existence. They don't provide a clear answer about what happens after death, or whether consciousness survives independently of the brain. They don't give a unified message or a single narrative. What they offer instead is something more delicate and more humbling. The possibility that reality is more expansive, more interconnected, and more layered than we can comprehend from within the confines of ordinary awareness. They remind us that consciousness is not something we understand fully. That perception might stretch farther than the brain's physical boundaries. That the moment between life and death may hold insights our waking minds aren't equipped to grasp. And that the stories people bring back, fragmented, symbolic, beautiful, and sometimes bewildering, might be glimpses of a larger truth we're only beginning to explore. Some survivors say that if life is a story, then near-death experiences feel like stepping briefly backstage. Others say it's more like hearing a whisper from a place we came from and will one day return to. And a few insist that the experience isn't about death at all. It's about remembering what we are beneath the confusion of living. Whatever the explanation, these accounts share one message: that existence extends beyond what we can see, and that the moments before death may reveal a clarity unlike anything we experience while alive. People who return often say they no longer feel alone. They say they no longer feel like reality is random or indifferent. Instead, they carry with them the deep, quiet sense that something profound and intelligent is woven into the structure of the universe, and that this something is gentle.